So I think we're just decided to go straight into it. And first of all, as you well know, quite a number of our Arctic states are in the process or have developed a number of different Arctic strategies. I understand that Greenland Minister is working on a new joint Arctic strategy with Denmark and the Faroe Islands. Minister, could you tell us how this is going to align or diverge from Greenland's own Arctic strategy?
Let me make it clear so you understand the distinction of Denmark and Greenland. Greenland doesn't have an Arctic strategy due to the fact that Greenland is an integral part of Arctic. All we do is concerning Arctic. So we don't have an Arctic strategy because all we do in the financial part, industry, transportation, all has to do with the Arctic. So it makes no sense for us to have a strategy and say that's what we do in regards to Arctic. But the Kingdom of Denmark is revising its Arctic strategy, where government of Greenland is of course being heard of which priorities we think Denmark should pursue in the Arctic matters. As you know, Greenland is an autonomous part of the Kingdom of Denmark. We have had self-government for the past 40 years, and we are moving toward independence. And that's the path the government of Greenland and the Parliament of Greenland has pursued for the past many years. The goal of independence is based on the self-relying economy with the desire to develop the society of Greenland. Greenland is distinct compared with perhaps Canada and Alaska, that the beneficiary of the mineral resources are the entire society of Greenland. The beneficiary means that all the citizens are to be benefited on the exploitation of the mineral resources. For the past 11 years, Greenland has had the power to make own decisions in all things concerning mineral resources. That's our sole responsibility, and the benefits that we get is divided between Greenland and Denmark when we exceed a certain amount of 75 million Danish kroner. Then we negotiate how the division of the revenues are to be in the future. But from that to say where we stand today, I think Greenland has much different legal and judicial traditions compared with Canada and Alaska. Despite having the same challenges, we have a different approach and setup in many ways, which is interesting for us to learn what Canada is doing, what Alaska is doing, and how the relations between the territorial and the federal governments are interacting in legal matters and in terms of exploitation of mineral resources. I think we are well aware of the differences. That's the realities and perhaps the conditions, which is a bit different from your traditions. But we learn from US and from Canada in terms of public consultations and the elements of public benefit agreements, impact benefit agreements. We make use of Canadian know-how and expertise that we have incorporated in our Mineral Resources Act, and the engagement you do with the local communities on how to benefit the local people. So we are striving to get experience and to get expertise because Canada and Alaska is some way ahead in terms of exploiting mineral resources. Despite having a long history of mineral extraction for over 230 years, the beneficiaries have been quite different until for 11 years ago, where we assumed the power and we became the sole beneficiary in terms of what's being exploited. But then there's another challenge for us dividing the revenues. And it is perhaps some of these small details enabling us to either go fast or slow. I think we have many considerations in terms of how we prioritize the use of our mineral resources. We face the same challenges in regards to the lack of infrastructure because of the rural population we have. We have 74 communities living across the western coast of Greenland and some part of the eastern Greenland. So they're very small and compact populations. We have been able to connect Greenland by using cutting edge technology in communications, in the power supply, airport infrastructure, etc. We have harbor on most communities, despite lack of renovation, etc. We have a considerable gap in terms of housing standards in many communities. So there's a gap of investments that we look at. The same applies for our educational system with the primary school. The high school is, the college system is very adequate, the same with our university. I think we lack at the preschool area and the primary school, along with our healthcare system and the social network we have. But despite that, Greenland is a well-functioning society with all the challenges we have with high suicide rate and perhaps alcohol and other abuse that we have. But I guess that's one of the challenges that we see elsewhere. But we are optimistic on our future and how we conduct our business. I think we have the same challenges of attracting investments, which is why we promote Greenland in Canada, in Iceland, in US, in China, in Australia, in Europe, in various forums to make our relations understand the challenges and what we are facing in short term, middle term, and long term.
Thank you, and my apologies, Minister. I agree. A Greenland strategy didn't need to be framed as a Greenlandic Arctic strategy, since of course we live in the Arctic. And here in Canada, we actually have developed an Arctic policy framework, not exactly a strategy per se, but at the same time, the three northern territories as well as the provinces have signed bilateral agreements with our federal government. And in the north, the federal government is providing, in our case, 566 million. I think in Labrador sort of area, it's about 400 million. NWT, similarly, almost 450 million as well in Yukon. So there's a tremendous amount of investments in the development of 10-year infrastructure strategies. So how do we ensure, with all these strategies and the policy framework, which is not a strategy, that we align these and integrate them in a meaningful way?
That's a very good question. So first of all, good morning, everyone, and it's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to share the Fireside chat with my colleague from Greenland, and of course, we'd love to see more partnership between Canada and Greenland in co-partners of work across the Arctic. And I know it happens in a number of forums, but as a government to government, I think we could do a lot more than what we currently do today. The Northern and Arctic Policy Framework, I spent the last 2 years on behalf of the federal government doing consultations across the Arctic regions of Canada to formulate that policy. So you want to talk about a somewhat difficult but optimistic task. It certainly was that. It's the first Northern framework that has been co-developed with First Nations, Inuit, and Métis governments in the Arctic region, and with territorial governments and the federal government. So that in itself was a huge undertaking. And while the actual policy was co-developed and speaks to the portion that I worked very heavily on was dealing with economic and infrastructure in the Arctic regions. And there are other chapters to the strategy that speaks to national defense and Arctic sovereignty. And that was a very, again, complementary component of what needed to be done. And that piece was led by Global Affairs and National Defense. One of the things that we did as well that was very different in terms of how the federal government forms policy is we invited Indigenous groups like ITK as a lead organization for Inuit in Canada to submit a chapter that would speak directly to how they see the implementation of the priorities for Inuit, for example. We also invited territorial governments to submit a chapter. So while the policy piece was spoke to a larger sector of what needed to be done, we allowed them to zero in on where their priorities would be and what their aspirations were to move forward immediately and in the long term. So that piece was a little bit different. Now we've moved to the implementation stage of the Arctic and Northern Framework. That's why you're seeing the new Department of Northern Affairs being formed within government. That will be the key department that will drive the implementation. That implementation can only be successful with the engagement of all of the partners, meaning every department across the federal government that is a part of it, the Indigenous partnerships, and the territorial governments. The other success is going to be dependent upon the infusion of investment by the federal government. The commitment to implement this can only happen with solid investment capital. We talked last night about, and Russell, I'm not sure if he's still here, he was one of the Fireside chat people last night, and he spoke about the three-pronged process to reaching our infrastructure and resource development goals in the Arctic. And, one was government and investing in infrastructure. Two was the companies that are driving these developments, whether it's a mining company, oil and gas company, whatever the case may be. And third was the capital investment people that are out there and how they invest. And it was very evident in his talks, as it has been in my experience in living and working in Canada's Arctic, that without government kicking off that first initial piece of infrastructure, it makes it much more difficult for everyone else. That was loud and clear as we went through the Arctic and Northern Framework Policy consultations, but there were a lot of other things. So when you look at this policy, you're going to see that it speaks to probably every aspect of challenge and opportunity that is in the Arctic region of Canada, because when you live there, you realize that you just can't focus on opportunity when you have all these other challenges that are surrounding you every single day. And whether that challenge is cost of living, food security, employment opportunity, land claims, all of these pieces for the government of Canada are critical in terms of bringing it to a place where you can have real successful economic development and opportunities. So you can't, as a government, you can't ignore one piece at the peril of the other piece, and they all require attention, immediate attention. So I want to outline that piece. I'm a strong proponent of resource development in the North. I grew up in a small, isolated community, fly in, fly out. I know how critical transportation is. I always say you'll never get me vote against anything for the CBC because it was the only medium to the world that we had in the North for many, many years. And never had another television or radio station or even a newspaper back then. So, you know, when you look at it in the context of where we've come from in the terms of isolation from the world to the global contact that we have now, that in itself has been a huge success story. However, when you look at the North, I'm a supporter, as I said, of resource development and building a stronger economy for Northerners because I've seen the success firsthand. You know, just in the fishing industry itself, in the fishing sector, you know, the North is really just starting to come into its own. When you look at mining, there's been no better fit for Inuit, in my opinion, in employment opportunity than it has been in the mining industry. You know, you work on the land, you're able to be in the environment that you grew up in, and you know, to do things that you enjoy. And I come from a riding that is huge in mining development in Canada, one of the largest exporters. We are the largest exporter of iron ore in Canada, but also in nickel production and many other minerals. But so I've seen firsthand, but I've also seen the tremendous challenge that comes with trying to reach those goals. And we've seen it in what's been happening with Baffinland over the years in trying to move their operations forward. What's happening in the Northwest Territories now with the lack of road infrastructure that is really causing a difficulty for industry to move forward. The same in Nunavut. You know, it's good to see Stan here and Scott, Daryl, all these guys that I've had the opportunity to work with on major infrastructure projects in the various territories. And very pleased that in the last couple of years, we were able to move on things like energy projects that had been on the table for a long time, transportation networks that had should have been done 10 years, 15, maybe 20 years ago that are finally getting done. How fast do we need to go? A lot faster than we're going today, unfortunately, and that requires huge capital investment. And again, while the government of Canada did a tremendous job with the push of a lot of people in this room and many others in Canada's North to formulate the kind of programs and carve-outs that we need to make it happen, we can't fall down on the job. There's more that need to be done, and it really starts with educating. I always tell my crew in Ottawa that I feel like I'm an educator first and a politician second. And I've always felt that way coming from the north. Even in the province that I live in, I'm classified as Atlantic Canada because Labrador is a part of Newfoundland. Labrador is the north. It is not Atlantic Canada. And just in explaining that to people is a starting point in almost every conversation I have to move a file in my region. So it's, and I mean, I can't change that. That was the British Privy Council made that decision in the 1900s. I'd like to change it some days. Could you note that? Who's the journalist in the room? So educating is a huge piece of this. And the fact that all of you are in the room, whether you are supporters of the Arctic and the North, whether you've never been there or not, but you want to learn more, you want to be a champion for it, it's all important. And spreading that knowledge, using that knowledge to educate others is where our success is going to come from. And I learned, some of you were in the room last night, I've been in politics for a long time, but only in federal politics for the last 6 years. And one of the things that was very clear to me coming from the North and being a part of government is that the North did not exist across the federal government in any substantial way, in my opinion. And making that change and that leap to, including funds that spoke directly to the North, including infrastructure investments that spoke directly to the North, was a huge shift. But there's lots of shifting to do. We now have a wall and we have a department and we have some funding, but we have a lot of work to do. And I know when Madeleine, and listen, she knows this better than me. She's been around this so long as well. But when you talk about 400 million for this region or 500 million for that region, we also know that when you invest in the North, it's very expensive. It costs a lot. What you're getting for 400 million is not the same return that you're going to get for that 400 million in Saskatchewan or in Ontario, Southern Ontario. So it's, you got to really put it in perspective. But I think the bottom line for us right now as a government is to continue to focus on important infrastructures around connectivity and including technology and transportation and bringing those services to Northern and Arctic communities and regions is really going to help us move forward in a way that we haven't been able to do in the past. And that's the agenda that I've really been driving for the Northern Arctic regions inside of government. So,
Thank you. I think I'm just going to go a little bit off script because I think what Russell said last night, for those who were not with us, is that there are three particular areas of interest for investors. Transportation, in particular airports or shipping. Another was telecommunications and another was energy. And I'm also very aware that Greenland has opened up its office in Washington, and now you're looking at the U.S. potentially opening up an office in Greenland. There may be value in, I don't know if Canada had any interest in looking at opening up an office in Greenland. The reality is that getting yourself out there, making yourself known and presence and developing that package, as Russell said, that informs but also speaks to investors so that you've got government investing, you've got the developers, who are wanting to come into our respective regions, whether from Alaska, Yukon, NWT, Labrador, Nunavut, and in Greenland. There seems to be, a lot of different actors. We've got the Arctic Council, we've got the Arctic Economic Council. How do we collectively, work together to really get the big investors, the big pension funds? We're talking about billions of dollars, not only in Ontario, that are now looking at investing, in other places worldwide, in China. How do we together create that Arctic Infrastructure Fund, something along the lines what Russell spoke to last night, is like that Alaskan permanent fund where we can bring the dollars that actively invest in our regions. Like, how do we do that together? I think there's little bits, as I said, Greenland's been quite strategic, and you're getting awareness because you opened up that office in the United States, and now U.S. wants to come to Greenland. Is that part of that sort of overall thinking of it's both political and it's attracting investors?
You need to look at things on a long term, Sheen. We opened our representation in Washington, D.C. because it made sense for us to have a direct communication line to United States. It's not something that came out of the blue. U.S. troops have been based in Greenland for almost 80 years. So U.S. has had a significant impact in Greenland in good and bad ways. But the good things we've had is that Thule Air Base and other bases in the past have represented tax revenue and revenue in general, training facilities, jobs that have attracted young people to get a training. So for that, it's been an asset for us that we think is important to maintain because it develops Greenland technology